Saddle up your horses.
Pitter patter, let's get at her. It is another episode of the Manely Broncos Podcast, and we are continuing to dive into the positional groups, if you will, for the Broncos. And like we said, we're going to be doing this a couple times. In the sense, we're going to be doing it this go around as free agency is creeping ever so close. And I want to say the tampering period begins, like the actual window, because everybody knows, like, the legal tampering period is really when the free agency kicks off, not the actual official window. So, right, because, like, what's the term? Like, legal tampering, when everybody kind of knows that.
Do those words even go together? Because isn't the whole thing with tampering supposed to be that it's done, I don't want to say maliciously, but against accepted practice?
The only time really that you actually ever see it be, like, I guess you could say, like, against the rules that I've seen would have been like the NBA, right? Because I think, like, there was a story or two. I think it was DeAndre Jordan, right? Like, Denver Nuggets player DeAndre Jordan, NBA champion DeAndre Jordan. Like, he was doing something like he signed something with. Like he signed, I want to say was it like a deal with the Dallas Mavericks or something, or he was going to sign a deal with the Mavericks, or it was another team, and I guess he was planning to, or he still signed, and they got blasted for tampering or something like that. I forget how it all went down, but yeah, in the NFL circles, like, it's just legal tampering.
I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. So, yeah, like we said, we're going to talk about the offensive positional groups. But again, and actually in this go-around, we're going to do exactly what we did last time. In the sense, we'll talk about an offensive positional groups, but then we'll kind of go back and we'll talk about the defensive groups. So in this particular episode, we're going to talk about the trenches. We're going to dive into the trenches. We're going to talk about the offensive line, and we're going to treat it exactly the way we did the defensive line. So we're going to go from the inside in terms of maybe not necessarily the guards. We'll talk about the guards, but we'll talk about guards. We'll talk about, of course, center, and then we'll go to both tackle spots, left tackle, right tackle. And then we'll go in terms of the secondary. We'll go outside, and we'll go to the safety position, and then we'll go to the cornerback position, which, of course, is going to be a need in possibly, maybe even a cornerback too. Or if the Broncos are going to be aggressive in getting after a quarterback, you might actually need a cornerback one, depending on if the trading up with Pat Surtain actually happens. Which, I mean, it's far more easier to predict, obviously, that you're going to be wanting to sign a cornerback too, in essence, and versus trading up into like the top three and having him be involved with Pat Surtain in any way. So we got you covered no matter what, though.
Let's do it. So, here's a question: does it make more sense on the offensive line to start from the center position and go outwards, or does it make more sense to start on, I guess, highest position of need and or position where there could be the most change?
Uncertainty? Yeah.
Well, there's a reason I specifically said change.
Yeah. Well, first things first, why don't we lead off with the big topic of the day that's been going on, what should we say, in the last 12 to 24 hours, and that would be this rumbling of news that has been centered around J.J. McCarthy. A Vikings reporter, and this is notable, mind you, like the Vikings reporter actually talking about this is notable because the Vikings have been in the conversation as possibly not just moving on from Kirk Cousins, but possibly dabbling into a younger quarterback circle. Like, they are a team that is definitely worth monitoring when it comes to drafting a young quarterback. And frankly, even if they keep Kirk Cousins, they're in the market of taking a young quarterback because they want their heir apparent down there in Minnesota. So first things first, before we dive into the free agency stuff, is Paul Allen. Paul Allen mentioned, as we said, he was a Vikings reporter. He mentioned that if there is one quarterback that he is hearing, it is that Sean Payton absolutely loves J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, and this is interesting to me, and there's a couple of things going on here. I think everyone listening, and that's obviously in Broncos country, at least I would assume you're all in Broncos country and not other teams, although we welcome everyone else.
Yeah.
Might be wondering, like, what does the Vikings reporter have to do with this? I think this is somewhat interesting because I've continued to see, and this might just be Vikings fans, but I've continued to see Vikings circle people. I don't even know, like, what is the exact terminology for Vikings fans? Is it Vikings? I know it's like skull. I don't know.
Skull Vikings or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like Vikings country. I don't know. Whatever it is, the Vikings group, if you will, continue to kind of pound the table a little bit for JJ, or at least be interested in JJ as like the heir apparent to, if they move on from Kirk Cousins and whatever happens with that situation this offseason. And the thing that I think makes it somewhat interesting is reporters that cover that team obviously know how, or try to know how the team feels about specific prospects, and them bringing up Sean Payton as liking JJ McCarthy. The only reason to me that that's interesting is Minnesota picks one pick before us. So they could be hearing, oh, well, we like JJ McCarthy, but the Broncos might try to leapfrog us, or it's potential even that they're looking to move down and they hear like, oh, the Broncos want to move up because they like JJ McCarthy. There's a variety of like things that kind of tie into this, but I think it is interesting because they pick one pick before us. They pick at 11.
Yeah, it is definitely interesting because like because I think that the other point too is like when you are in the NFL circles, you also aren't necessarily hearing stuff from your own point of view. You know what I mean? Like you're not necessarily hearing stuff like, okay, this is what the Vikings are necessarily going to do. This is something that like is league wide. Like, and the fact that the Vikings reporter, if you will, Paul Allen, has been hearing that JJ McCarthy is going to be an option, or maybe the option for the Denver Broncos, is definitely notable because, as you said, they are a pick ahead of the Broncos. And frankly, it's also not just that. And granted, I don't know what's in the full clip, if he even mentions the Las Vegas Raiders, right? Because we also know that the Raiders are going to be in the market for a young quarterback too, as well. So I think that, but it is definitely notable, that the Broncos were even mentioned here, and they're just let alone Sean Payton, because he's a quarterback. And frankly, we haven't necessarily spent a lot of time diving into like breaking them down specifically. We talk about the quarterback position a lot, but I'll tell you, I think the McCarthy, one of the biggest things that jumps out to you from just an overall fit with Sean Payton, like his overall, like McCarthy's overall like base and how he, uses that base to throw the football, and with his release may actually be the prettiest of all the prospects that's in this class right now. Like it feels like almost if you're looking at like maybe like a prototypical like pitcher, right? Like in baseball, like it's a very fluid, like almost perfect motion. Like it's art to me. Like it's art. That doesn't necessarily or equate, excuse me, to like, him actually being a perfect prospect by any means. But the way that he throws a football, like it's pretty. Like it is absolutely pretty when it comes off of his hand.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I continue to hear about with why people connect him and Sean Payton, and obviously this kind of is also visible when you watch him. I haven't watched a ton of JJ McCarthy yet, although I would like to, because again, I continue to hear about him connected to us, is he's a very quick processor. It's like it's the mental side of it that is kind of appealing to someone like Sean Payton. And again, the Drew Brees connection is obvious, but just in terms of being able to make the right read within his offense, like Sean Payton is an offensive guy. He wants a guy who can say, this is my dream of this offense, go make this work, and be able to trust that guy to make it work. And you have to be able to be smart enough to know the ins and outs of where to go with the football and how to read certain coverages and attack certain weak spots in what Sean calls for you to be able to do that. And someone like Russell Wilson, I think, is going to be and has proven to be more limited in that because of his ability to, or I guess, I don't know if I'd say because of his ability to run, but his inclination to be more of is my first read there? No, run the ball. Like, he's not the guy that's going to try to dissect the defense.
Which to me, which I also kind of find very interesting, and don't necessarily mean to have a Caleb Williams discussion, right? But like one of the things that has made Caleb Williams or even Patrick Mahomes like both of those quarterbacks, apparently are quarterbacks that Sean Payton has loved or loves, right? Because like Sean Payton, has mentioned that he loves Caleb Williams or that he loves Patrick Mahomes, right? Well, one of the biggest things that like has made Mahomes famous, or let alone Caleb Williams famous, like in college, is their off-script ability, right? Like their off-script ability, and to make plays, when plays break down. Yeah, right. No, I
get
what
I'm saying though. Like I think he values that, but as a bonus. Like I think he wants the guy to be able to have the foundational ability to again, maybe use the term dissect the defense, know where to go with the football, see who's open, know what the play call is, and get it to the right guy in time. And then anything beyond that, if the play breaks down, being able to scramble and extend and make plays, like I think he does value that. But you have to have that baseline of, can you actually be a quarterback and then have like you hear about all the time, like plus quarterback, like having that skill set, which is you can be like a starting NFL quarterback, and then you have a little bit something extra,
right? As
opposed to certain quarterbacks, specifically Russell Wilson, who it seems to be more of he's kind of just like an athlete that can run around. And I'm not trying to bag on. No, like he's made ridiculous plays, but I don't think he doesn't have the floor ability. I think that Sean Payton wants. He may have the ceiling, but he isn't the guy. Like, you can't just depend on him to go out there and just be a quarterback and make all the throws that he needs to be called on to make, which is why I think you saw Sean Payton kind of simplify the offense a little bit. He needs a guy that can do all the right things. And then I think he would value being able to do something extra. Yes, but you have to be able to do the fundamentals.
Let us know what you guys feel in the comments. Feel free to chime in the comments, of course, too. And remember, if you guys are watching on Twitter, you guys can actually comment on the stream. One of the things that they've added now is if you guys are watching this through Twitter, you can comment on our show. And if you guys have any comments, we just recently talked about JJ McCarthy. I'll continue it in just a little bit. But if you guys have some more thoughts about JJ McCarthy, chime in the chat, either on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, over on the MHRT Network page, and I certainly would love to hear what your guys' thoughts. Brandon would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are. And I think
as long as we're just quickly on that topic still, I will say I do continue to hear just more about JJ McCarthy in general, and it's possible he's not even there at 12.
Right. And I think that
So you never know.
One of the things, and you were talking about obviously the off script and versus like the schedule stuff, and I think that one of the things, and we talk about that as a bonus, like one of the bonuses to McCarthy's game is actually he's an exceptional athlete. Like he is an exceptional athlete, and the other layer to that I think is maybe the bonuses of bonuses is that he won the national championship, but he played under a successful NFL head coach. And I mean, we can say what we want about Jim Harbaugh in our division. I mean, now that he's in our division now, it kind of is what it is. But in terms of if you're evaluating the player and the prospect, the fact that McCarthy was so successful in a coach's system and an NFL, if you will, an NFL style system, right? I mean, he was asked to run a very run heavy offense, which he wasn't asked necessarily to do a whole lot. But when you win a national championship, you are asked to make those certain plays. You are asked to make those certain plays to win the football game. And frankly, there was a fun statistic, an incredible statistic. I think this is what you're going to say.
I think you're literally going to say what I'm about to say.
Yeah, but how he led the entire NCAA in passing attempts in the first half, right?
Minus screens. But there's more than just that. Did you continue to read that thread?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
There's more in that thread. So the thread that he's referring to, that Cam's referring to, there was and this is funny because it kind of came out around the same time that you saw a bunch of people also like kind of hating on McCarthy a little bit for like the team he played on and them not relying on him or needing him to be the playmaker to carry the team because they had such a great running game. They had such a good team just in general. And Brett Whitefield, who I think he's more in the fantasy community, but and he used to be, I guess, with Pro Football Focus, kind of came out with this thread of interesting statistics that kind of paint a slightly different picture, which is the first one is what Cam just said, which is basically that JJ McCarthy had the most first half passing attempts in college football minus screens. The second part of that thread is that he also had the highest percentage of passing attempts on 3rd and 6 or more, the highest percentage of passing attempts against top 25 defenses as well, which is kind of flies in the face a little bit of that whole they didn't need him, they didn't rely on him, he didn't do much.
Right. And I was actually getting ready to pull this up, and after this we'll go forward with our free agency stuff. But JJ McCarthy for 3 years, as far as turnover worthy plays, he had only 11 turnover worthy plays. And that's according to Pro Football Focus. He only had 11 turnover worthy plays. There's probably a lot of ways that you can certainly interpret that with the way that the offense runs, possibly with it being a very high run heavy offense, but also still like when you go and you look at it from the standpoint of just the overall offense and the efficiency with where he was able to run that's still very big. I mean, that's still very big in the sense like he was still rather efficient when he was able to run that offense.
The fourth thing in this thread, the final thing in this thread that isn't really a statistic is about JJ specifically, but Michigan had a 21-point lead or more in 11 of their games. There were 7 fourth quarters where JJ McCarthy sat on the bench.
It's slightly different in a way, but it's almost like, do you remember back when like the Warriors were like really good, like in terms of like their prime years and when they're really good? The fact
that you say that in past tense now just makes me smile.
It's sweeter. It makes you sweeter. Yeah. But like it reminds me a little. It's different in a way, but it reminds me in a lot of ways of like when Steph Curry would just go off, right? Like he would go off, or just the team would go off, like through 3 quarters, and then in the fourth quarter it'd be like, all right, I'm good. I'll just sit in the fourth quarter. You guys can, go to town and, get your development, if you will. And that's what made the Warriors so good in essence. But yeah, that's what it kind of reminds me of. But now let's move on. Which one do you actually want to talk about first? Do you want to talk more on the secondary and cornerback room, safety cornerback room, or do you actually want to talk about the offensive line first?
Well, let me flip this around. Which one do you view as the bigger need? I have my answer, but I'm just curious to know what you think.
I think if you were to possibly look at it in just the overall waves of free agency, I think that if you were to look at it from possibly the way that they could go about it, I feel like it's easier to predict that the in-house replacement for Lloyd Cushenberry is going to be easier than necessarily finding a cornerback too. But by that same token, like signing a cornerback too, like, is also not necessarily going to cost you as much money. I feel like, of course, if you're going to go out and sign a cornerback one. So I feel like it's almost like it kind of goes both ways, because like you're not necessarily spending as much money. I feel like, for like a cornerback too, and it is roughly the same in essence if you're doing the center position, right? Because if you're going to be starting Alex Forsyth, and we'll talk about the center position, that's a far more cheaper option, of course, than going out and going to the free agency market and, signing a far more experienced center, on your offensive line. So I feel like it's kind of even.
I do think, well, my opinion on this question hinges solely on, is Garrett Bowles still a Bronco? Got insults on JJ McCarthy. Yeah, David, I don't have an opinion on him yet. Like I'm kind of in the suspended opinion camp. Like I haven't watched a ton of him. I just can know that it's interesting to continue to see the back and forth of he's really bad, they didn't depend on him, why didn't they let him throw the ball, to what we just talked about, which is no, he actually threw the ball more than anyone else in the first half of every game, but then they were running by so much he didn't even play the whole second half. It's just interesting. I have no opinion on him yet. The only other reason that I do think he's someone you have to at least keep an eye on is because of the quarterbacks that are in this class that are kind of more at the top of the pile, if you will. He's pretty much the only one that you can say would have the option to be there at 12. In the
probably
sense
he and
that,
Bonek.
like he's QB1 at number 12. Like,
yeah,
depending on your board rankings, I'm not saying I have him there, but like by general consensus of what I've seen in terms of who's going to be there at 12, he's kind of the number one guy. And then there's like the Bo Nix part of the equation, which he seems to be kind of all over the place. And then the whole Michael Penix thing, which I don't even know what to think there. I mean, there's
no doubt they'll be
going to go in day one. But anyway, you have to kind of do your homework on him because he is the one who's most likely to be there. And then also from what I've seen and heard, he does seem to have skills that Sean Payton values and looks for. And then the obvious Drew Brees, but athletic comparison is there.
But as far as what we were talking about in terms of free agency and what you had asked about.
But anyway, going back to going back to what I was saying. I think it solely to me hinges on what happens with Garrett Bowles. So,
and that's one of the reasons why I phrase it from the standpoint, at least from where we're at the point now, Garrett Bowles is a Bronco. Like right now, Garrett Bowles is a Bronco.
Right. So if we're going at it right now, in terms of like the current construction of the roster, because he has not been traded or released, I'm going to go with the assumption that he is still on this team. And I think I might still say that offensive line to me is the bigger need. And the reason I say that is because of even though he is currently on the roster, Lloyd Cushenberry is technically a free agent. And then there's the whole McGlinchey situation.
So you're saying regardless, tackle.
Yeah, the more I thought about it, the more I'm sticking with it. The reason I said it hinges on if Garrett Bowles is a Bronco is if Garrett Bowles is no longer a Bronco, it goes from being like 55-45 in the sense of it's slightly more important than cornerback to 60-40. It's or 65-40, 35. It's more like significantly more important. And the main reason there is obviously still Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain, best cornerback in the NFL, is also still on this roster. Although again, that you never know what's going to happen there. But
yeah,
I would be shocked if he's not.
It's far more likely he's literally staying instead of
right. He's the one, like between the two of them. Garrett Bowles is by far has the higher risk of leaving. And then you also got, the emergence of guys like Jaquan McMillan, the unfortunate kind of flopping of Damari Mathis, but I'm kind of curious to see how he potentially turns that around a little bit. K'Waun Williams, who
he's probably not going to be back. I don't think
probably won't be back. But again, as of now, I think he's technically still on the roster, right? He's not a free agent, right? Let me find out.
Let me go look here. I'll call up Spot Track here.
I beat you to it. He is going to be a free agent. He is a free agent. Okay, so yeah, I mean, definitely there's a bit more there, but I think the presence of Pat Surtain just makes it. The presence of Pat Surtain and the emergence of Jaquan McMillan makes it slightly stronger for me than offensive line. So I'm still actually sticking with the offensive line as being my number one between the two of them, but I do think that it's pretty close right now. If Garrett Bowles is not on this team, it's not going to be as close.
So I think there's two logical scenarios that the Broncos are going to go with. Like in terms of this scenario that we're going with right now, and it's probably at least fitting that we talk about what options the Broncos could have if they do move on from Garrett Bowles. I think there's two logical scenarios where the Broncos can go with if they do hold on to Garrett Bowles. One is that they go out and they re-sign Cam Fleming. They re-sign Cam Fleming, they bring him back, and you continue to groom Alex Pavcheski, which, by the way, that is a name, again, like to say that name again, that is a name that Broncos country should be filing away right now. He played really well in preseason, but also Sean Payton, it seems like he really prides himself on developing guys, within the system, right? And so if you are going to possibly move on from Garrett Bowles, maybe not this year, but next year, Alex Pavcheski is a name that I would file away for possibly being that left tackle, and possibly even starting at left tackle next year. The other scenario, so the one scenario was, you bring Cam Fleming back. The other is that you go into a much more, and our plan is not necessarily to take a deep dive in the draft from the tackle position, but from everything that we've been reading and hearing is that this is a very, very, very deep tackle class. And if you really want to dive in and really take your tackle or two, this would certainly be one of those tackle classes to do it. So if you still
think you have to. I think that's another position that we talked about last week. It's another one of those positions where if you don't come out of this draft and with drafting at least one tackle, I think you messed up. We have not spent nearly enough draft capital on the offensive line and tackles in general, specifically.
I mean,
recently.
The statistic that just continues to boggle my mind, and it is associated with Garrett Bowles, is the fact that the Broncos have never, drafted a tackle. The key word, drafted a tackle since Garrett Bowles. Drafted
tackle, not an
a
offensive
tackle.
lineman, but yeah,
Yeah,
I know
a
that's kind
tackle.
of.
It's just like we're going on like 2017,
And Garrett Bowles was drafted in 2017.
like 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020,
That was
2021,
almost 7 years ago.
2023. Like it's just like that's what 8 years ago. All in all, like that's
Close.
like
7, 8.
it's basically the length of
Almost
amount.
a decade.
No, I was gonna say like it's the length of time that we've had that we've basically been in purgatory right now as a Broncos, fan base. Which maybe to Bowles' credit, why maybe he doesn't want to be a Bronco anymore, right? So, it's going to be interesting to me. So, like, let's look at it from the standpoint of maybe regardless of the whole Garrett Bowles situation. Let's look at those two scenarios. I did mention Cam Fleming, but let's look at the scenario of like, let's say he stays on the roster. And then let's also look at it from the standpoint of like, let's just say he moves on from the Broncos, or like they trade him, or or they cut him. Let's look at some of those different players that we can look at. And by the way, people that are watching this stream, listening to this stream, if you guys have any comments, again, feel free to chime in and into the chat and let us know what you guys think. And if you guys are just joining us, we are talking about Garrett Bowles, his status, or I should say just the tackle position in general. All right, so let's look at this. I feel like it's funny on Spot Track, if you actually like do a much more detailed look, like at the left tackle position, that list is so small. That list is so small. Like literally, it's 4 players. It is 4 players that are like bona fide, like pure left tackles that's on the market. You have Tyron Smith, who we know is probably not going to be leaving Dallas, I'd imagine. He's 33 years old. Actually, this is the other part. Every single one of those like pure left tackle players that are on the market right now are 30 and older. Donovan Smith is coming from Kansas City. He's an unrestricted free agent. I doubt he would be coming and signing with a divisional rival, right? And then you have Cornelius Lucas with the Washington Commanders. Dwayne Brown, who's
Brown is almost 39.
He's almost 40 now.
That's actually I didn't know he was that old.
And then, of course, Tyron Smith, who is one of the better left tackles. And
Garrett Bowles is also 30. No.
So,
obviously
and now,
he's not on that list. But
and now, if you were to look at the right tackle spot, Andres Pete from New Orleans at 30. Trenton Brown.
Yeah, they have him as a guard, though.
Jonah Williams. George Fant. It's true. They do have him as a guard. George Fant. No relation to Noah Fant. Jermaine. I'm probably going to butcher this last name, but Illuminor.
Illuminor, yeah.
Are also blast from the past name Billy Turner. Kendall Lamb, David Quessenberry, and Charlie Heck.
Yeah.
Those are like just pure right tackles, if you will.
I think it's quite obvious going off of those names that the free agency is not where you fill this need this offseason.
It boasts that you probably should be strongly considering maybe you resign Cam Fleming.
Oh, you absolutely resign Cam Fleming in general. Like you have to. He is a fantastic swing tackle. But I think this just speaks even more to when people get a good tackle on either side of the line. 99% of the time, they're not leaving that team, barring a blank check.
Tyron Smith is a good example of this right now.
Tyron Smith, barring a blank check, then they're definitely not leaving until they're at least in their mid to late 30s and their career is nearing its eclipse. So this just kind of this just pushes the agenda of you need to be investing in the offensive line and specifically tackle through the draft even more. Like
1,000%.
you have to invest. It's not sexy. I don't care. You have to. You have to. You have to. You have to. If we don't come out of this draft with at least one tackle, we have messed up.
Yeah. And actually, if you just strictly select tackle on Spot Track, if anybody's following along with us and you select tackle on Spot Track, there are players who could play left tackle and right tackle, but they just list them at just a tackle position. So here are those options in terms of that list. And Cam Fleming actually falls into this. So the list actually grows a little bit more significantly. But Chukwuma Okorofor from Pittsburgh, 26-year-old. Yosh Nijman from Green Bay. Ollie Udo, obviously Cam Fleming. Isaiah Wynn. Prince Tiga, the tackle that is actually at Kansas City, but he was a really nice developmental prospect from TCU. Do you remember that name? Like, he was a really nice, like, developmental prospect from TCU. He's on that market.
Say that again. Say that again.
Prince Tega.
From
TCU. Yeah. Chris Hubbard, Matt Nelson, Josh Jones, Cameron Irving is on this list, but we also know that Cam Irving can also play center a little bit. Matt Pert, Jerron Christian, Brandon Parker, Quinn Bailey, who is 28, is on this. So the Broncos could bring back Quinn Bailey. And actually, it's a restricted free agent, is Quinn Bailey. I'm curious about this one. In fact, I think he had some starts with the Rams. He is a restricted free agent. He's also from the University of Iowa. But Alaric Jackson. Is like 20. It looks like he'll be turning 26 this upcoming year, probably, right? So he'll be turning 26. He's a tackle that when he came from Iowa, he could play left tackle, right tackle. He could play both different positions. We also know how successful, if you will, the tackle position has been coming from Iowa. I don't know if he would leave the Rams, but the restricted free agent part of this is at least notable. Because, I mean, if you are a Jackson fan, a Alaric Jackson fan, I don't know whether or not he would, come here. Because obviously it depends on
any of those names appeal to you?
No. Except for obviously Cam Fleming and really, like I said, probably Alaric Jackson. But there's not really any names that really just kind of stand out to me.
Draft tackle. That's all I'm going to say. Draft tackle. Yeah. I hope Garrett Bull stays. That's all I'm going to say. I hope Garrett Bull stays.
Yeah.
He's one of the better left tackles in the league. He is expensive. All good left tackles are expensive. He might not want to stay. Don't blame him. Yeah. But I hope he does.
The other thing is if you are able to get some decent draft capital in return for Garrett Bowles, I'm not saying you should force that pick to be a tackle, but if it's also within the top 100 picks, please make it a tackle. Please make it a tackle. So let's spend
even if we keep him, I think we need to spend a high pick on a tackle, a high investment, because he's 32.
Right. Let's spend a brief period. Talking about the guard position. No one is coming in free agency and signing and replacing Quinn Miners and Ben Powers. That's just is what it is. Ben Powers was the money investment that is going to be here long term under Sean Payton, and he did have an up and down year. He finished the year much stronger, down the stretch, but he did have an up and down year. And, but he's going to be here, and he was an investment by Sean Payton. So he's going to be here. As such, Mike McGlinchey is going to be here, maybe not just 2024, but also, beyond. However, I would say, and this is before we even talk about the right tackle position, or frankly, even after that, don't be surprised. And actually, maybe it's fitting since we just recently talked about the tackle position. Don't be surprised if McGlinchey is a candidate for a restructure this offseason to possibly, save some money a little bit and, obviously, work that contract up a little bit, so the Broncos can free up some money. So don't be surprised about that. Now, as far as the guard position, I don't think the only way that you actually like dip into the guard position is if maybe you feel like a guard is also capable of playing center, right? And really the only one that really leaps out at you, like immediately on top of this list, would be a guy like a Cody Whitehair, who was recently just cut by Chicago. Whitehair does have some center flexibility to where he can play center. So that's at least one of the flexible parts that at least jumps out at you almost like right away.
I don't see there being any. Let me put it this way. I don't think we can afford to not have continuity at the guard spots, considering how much we might not have continuity at the center position.
Yeah. So
this interior line has been actually really good. One of the strengths of this team, it's been surprisingly good. Quinn Miners is just a stud. Ben Powers did kind of have some ups and downs, but he did seem to trend more towards the up, thankfully.
As we've said.
And Lloyd Cushenberry turned it around. So I think, especially since you don't know if he's going to be back, and I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if they're prioritizing keeping him. I think they probably should. I know they have a guy they could pivot to on the roster already, but I think in either case, having continuity in the interior of their offensive line and as much as possible on the offensive line in general is going to be beneficial, but especially in the interior, if you're going to be switching to like Alex Forsyth and you're not going to be keeping Lloyd Cushenberry, you can't really afford to change anything up on the interior. And obviously, I mean, you don't need to. There's nothing that needs to change there. But I do think you can't have too much depth. So I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe sign someone that they can get for cheapish and maybe even draft someone at that spot later on. But I don't think the starters are obviously not changing. I don't think much is changing on the interior, especially again, if they change Alex. They put Alex Forsyth in.
And I feel like, and again, like, and as we were saying, don't expect the starting guard spots to change. If you're going to be adding anyone, it's either someone who is a swing offensive lineman that can play both on the inside and also the tackle spot, which we know, not to bring up his name again, but Cam Fleming is a player who can play guard. He's actually a much better tackle, obviously, than he is a guard, but he at least gives you that flexibility to where he can play guard. Connor McGovern.
Again, you need to keep Cam Fleming.
Yeah. Connor McGovern is a former name, not the Connor McGovern who I think is with Dallas, but and from Penn State, but Connor McGovern as in a familiar name, if you will, Connor McGovern, who is down there with the Jets. He is out there in free agency. But again, I feel like, and as we're pivoting a little bit to the center position, it really is vital. And it's one of the reasons why it's very important that the Broncos go with a more familiar route and someone that the offensive line has at least comfortability with. And that's one of the reasons why Alex Forsyth is probably your logical option to replace Lloyd Cushenberry if he moves on. And frankly, at this point, if you were to ask me what is the expected result, I think Lloyd Cushenberry moves on. The expected contract Lloyd is going to be getting on the open market is somewhere between or above $12 million a year. I would expect him to get, maybe in the 13s to 14 million a year. He's earned that contract. He was, according to Pro Football Focus, he was the second or third in the top five. I mean, based on 2023, he was a top five center in 2023. He played like it. He was successful. He really did a great job of adding that stability, and he really played well in a contract year. Now, the question is, whoever signs him, can he become that center, that the Broncos necessarily saw him to be, but just really was a little bit underwhelming in his first few years. But it's very clear that he's earned that payday. But as far as Forsyth goes, though, I just feel like it's much more beneficial to go not just also with a guy that is a cheaper option, of course, but of course, as I said, like a familiar option that offensive line knows. And of course, if you're going to be trusting with maybe what Zach Strief wants to do, let's go out and maybe put some trust into your offensive line coach and start that offensive center that you drafted in the 7th round. That apparently draft scouts, even though he was a 7th round draft pick, you feel pretty good about him at center.
The highest I've seen someone rank him, I don't remember exactly who this was, but it was a former player, and the name is eluding me, but you probably know who I'm talking about. When we drafted him, obviously in the 7th round, someone said, multiple people said he was the best center in the class. Someone specifically said they had a 2nd round grade on him. I don't remember who it was, but that's a steal. So I mean, I think if you're going to move off of Lloyd Cushenberry, you have a guy that, again, you can put in there and trust that he is able to take the reins. The only issue I see here, and unfortunately, I think this is really going to be the case with any drafted center, and it was the case with Lloyd Cushenberry, is center is such a difficult position to learn because of all the things that they have to take on. And obviously, even Lloyd Cushenberry, this was like what he was known for coming out of LSU, is he was the guy that was calling all the protections and doing all that stuff in college. When you get to the NFL level, it's so complex.
Yeah.
And obviously, Alex has now been on the roster and been in practice, so he's not a total rookie. But you get a guy in there that's really, really young. And I think there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve, which is why, I would say if you're putting Alex Forsyth in, I would hope for as much continuity next to him as possible. And obviously, we're not changing the starters, but in terms of them remaining healthy, for obvious reasons, like they're good players, you want them to remain healthy, but also just to shore up that interior and give him some extra help. Definitely wouldn't hurt. But I do think if this is a position where if Lloyd Cushenberry has every right to request a lot of money, this is one of those positions where we can look to maybe save some cap and
decent amount,
pivot to Alex Forsyth. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But again, there might be a learning curve. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, and I think that we say it so often at times with the quarterback position in general, in terms of that bridge, if you will, into like that quarterback, if you will. But I feel like at times maybe we forget a little bit about possibly like the bridge to another position on the roster, right? And I feel like maybe that's the case that we're seeing with Lloyd Cushenberry and Alex Forsyth, if you will, is that Alex Forsyth was maybe the heir apparent, even if he was a 7th round draft pick, was the heir apparent to be that center for the Broncos under Sean Payton, right? Jeff Schwartz, I think, is maybe one of the guys that you were referring to, who is actually a Kansas City fan, but he was raving about former offensive lineman. He was raving about Alex Forsyth and his.
That's who it was.
But yeah, so I think that it's pretty obvious maybe that direction that they're going to go. Let's pivot to the back end. Let's go to, because I feel like that seems to be the most logical scenario, right? Is that they're going to go with that in-house option versus necessarily into free agency. So let's go to the safety position. This one's going to be fascinating. I don't know necessarily about a lot of money that's going to be spent in particular with this position, but it is very important that you find someone that is going to be opposite of Justin Simmons, possibly, if a guy like a PJ Locke moves on, right? And, because Kareem Jackson, it's pretty obvious he's not going to be coming back or, like at all in terms of, the Broncos moving on from him, of course, all the fines that he was accumulating. That's a conversation for another day, the fines and everything.
You know what just sucks?
He touched the
injury.
Oh, the Kate. Oh, yeah.
What did you say? What were you going to say?
I was just going to say the fact that Kareem Jackson sided with Houston and and they made the playoffs.
Caden Stearns and his knee injury, because Caden Stearns was on an elite path. Like, Caden Stearns was going to be the next great safety in this secondary to pop off, and putting him next to Justin Simmons. Like, this was going to be one of the most elite top tier safety duos. This secondary with Caden Stearns healthy, retaining Justin Simmons, and obviously Pat Surtain, and with the emergence of Jaquan McMillan, like, this secondary has so much potential. And it just really sucks that you don't really know about Caden Stearns. I mean, obviously you know his talent, but can he stay on the field? When does he get healthy? He tore his patellar tendon. I think it was like literally week 1, right? It was awful.
Real quick, One-Eye Jacks.
I don't know exactly what the answer is, but go ahead. How do you feel about Forsyth when we drafted him? You go first.
I was gonna say I think we warmed up to it, right, Brandon? Like, you and I warmed up to it, and especially with how we were looking at it, right? Like, when the Broncos were talking about, like, even evaluating him, how they had, what was it, like a 2nd-round grade on him or a 3rd-round grade on him.
Mm-hmm.
They had a high grade on him. Like, they had a really high grade on him with in terms of, like, their overall grade, which, by the way, a subtle note, not talking necessarily just specifically about Forsyth, but that is a very important, like, note to remember come the draft point. Like, something to keep in mind, like, just in terms of maybe the quarterback position, wide receiver position, whoever position or whatever position they draft, that particular position, they may actually have a said grade, like a 1st-round grade or a 2nd-round grade on a player that they've taken, like, in the 3rd or the 4th round. So something to keep in mind there in terms of when you're evaluating or even looking at possible situations where, for a team, doesn't necessarily mean they're right or that they're wrong. Just that's necessarily the way that they go about it. So, but we kind of warmed up to it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually I liked the pick when we first made it. I didn't think it was a no risk, high reward pick to me, because you're taking him so late. Like,
7th round,
basically a free agent. You're taking him in the 7th round. You're
throwing darts at that point.
But I think he was a really good center at Oregon. And one of the things that people rave about him and you could see was fairly obvious, and also, again, kind of plays into
what's his smarts.
Pretty much, like, what is needed at that position is how cerebral he is and how smart he is. Like, there was a story, I don't remember exactly when this happened, and I can't seem to find it, but there were basically let's go. There were a couple plays, like, he basically was the player that checked the offense into a play that scored a touchdown twice. In like back-to-back weeks, I think, or something ridiculous.
Well,
He also won the Tom Hansen Medal, which is basically Oregon's like outstanding student athlete based on performance and achievement in
the
like
classroom.
on and off the field in the classroom as well. Like he's a very smart player, which you need to be at the center position, but I think he just does so many things well. He knows how to, again, call the protections he needs to call, do his job as a center. It's going to be harder at the NFL level, but I liked the pick. I didn't think there was really any downside to it. I was somewhat surprised it was so late.
Well,
I liked it.
And this is the point. Maybe you and I made it earlier, but it was just like, if you're talking about it from like just the overall perspective, that was one of the arguments for Lloyd Cushenberry coming into the NFL, and maybe one of the reasons why you feel far more comfortable about Forsyth actually taking the reins in 2024 is the simple fact that he took maybe the year off, right? Like he took the year off, learned under Lloyd Cushenberry, and so now he kind of understands, maybe the toll and the tax that's going to be, required of him to play center at the next level, right? Because we already know he was cerebral. So what did he learn in year two in terms of, playing the physical part of that, center position? So I think that it's going to be really interesting. I feel like to kind of see that unfold. What's up, Big Mike? Thanks for hopping in. All right, so
we were worried that you totally wrote off Cam after he said that we should draft Brock Bowers instead of keeping.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. Going back to the safety position, you kind of hit the nail on the head as far as like the safety position, and I feel like what makes the Caden Stearns stuff more devastating too is also the play during the season of PJ Locke. Because like with what we saw from PJ Locke in 2023, just even if Caden Stearns was healthy, then at that point, you're talking about a safety room where it is maybe the most talented room in the National Football League as far as that back end, right? Like, and even people were loving like what that safety room, and maybe it wasn't necessarily this last year, but like in years prior, like how good the Buffalo Bills safety room was, or even the Philadelphia Eagles, like the safety room, like the Broncos, like in the way the Philadelphia even had a down year, like it had the possibility to be the deepest safety room. And, you certainly wish that Stearns can recover and he can, become that guy again. Cause like, it's really just the injuries. Like it is just the injuries for Caden that he's recovering from, and
the worst thing, unfortunately.
It's the worst thing, and it's just the unfortunate thing. And you want him to stay a Denver Bronco, but because of the amount of injuries that he sustained, can it be something where the Broncos look long term and be like, is this a guy that we can continue to develop, or because of his injuries, do we need to move in a little bit of a different direction? So like, but I'll tell you though, like it's just going to be such a fun class to me in terms of the free agency position at safety. And I'm just going to go out and say it right off the top that there's one that's probably a pipe dream, but depending on what shakes out with it and, how everything, happens possibly. And, because is the Budda Baker stuff. Like, I'm just going to lead off with that. Budda Baker, he's not a free agent, but he has a club option, and he is with the Arizona Cardinals, right? And it all hinges on the Cardinals picking up that club option. If they don't pick up that club option, he will be hitting the open market, and you're talking about a safety who, if you have him opposite Justin Simmons, you have basically almost two quarterbacks of that defense, with Simmons and Budda Baker, that you can mix and match all you want at that point with a guy like a Simmons and a Baker, and especially for Baker, a guy that really knows that Vance Joseph's system well. And then, of course, another guy who who I actually think that, of course, Broncos country knows quite well, come maybe even the draft process that was, because it seemed like he was a very popular pick that wanted Broncos country wanted to be a Denver Bronco, and he is the nephew of a former Denver Bronco great, meaning Steve Atwater. Jeremy Chin.
Jump on Jeremy Chin? Yeah.
Jeremy Chin. Jeremy Chin is a free agent.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn, he was drafted that long ago. Don't blink. I feel like he was literally just picked like yesterday. Also, he was drafted by the Panthers. Man, I feel sorry for Jeremy Chin.
I am praying you can maybe see like maybe it's a pipe dream scenario, but like so just as far as a quarterback or a safety fit for this team that could possibly be, maybe playing linebacker in certain situations or even a safety in certain situations. I really want that to happen. I really want that to happen where the Broncos take that chance and they go out and they get, possibly Jeremy Chin and they have him in that secondary. It would be amazing.
Steve Atwater, come on, man. Hook us up. The family ties. We accept legacy players.
True.
We love legacy players. I didn't know he was a free agent. That would be interesting. Well, the Buda Baker thing, just to go back to that, obviously he's a phenomenal safety, and the Vance Joseph connection is there. The only thing to me that just is also why I hate the Caden Stearns injury.
Mm-hmm.
He ain't gonna be cheap.
Who?
Buda Baker.
Oh, yeah.
Buda Baker he gonna cost some money.
Yeah.
I would rather, and I know nothing about the safety class. I have not looked into the safety class whatsoever. But again, I would probably rather go back to the well in the draft and pick up some guys. You're kind of playing more for the future that way, unless you could find a guy that pops off, be Justin Simmons, 3rd round pick, kind of came in and was just good. So you never know at the safety position. But Jeremy Chin is interesting. I don't. I can't imagine that he wants to stay in.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you though. Let me run through some names for you, like in the safety free agency class, because there's some names. Like there's some names in this list. You have obviously Eddie Jackson, who was just recently cut by the Chicago Bears. Micah Hyde, who is obviously 33 years old, but he was cut. He's an unrestricted free agent from Buffalo. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who probably could have been a Denver Bronco last year. He was trolling a bunch of Bronco fans, of course, last year by following Instagram accounts and making people believe that he's going to end up being a Denver Bronco.
He was the one who told Lions fans to wear the blue ski masks, right? And then Amazon sold out of the blue ski masks immediately. That was fun.
Yeah. Jordan Whitehead is an unrestricted free agent. Jalen Mills, cornerback safety. Darnell Savage from Green Bay is a free agent. Mike Edwards from Kansas City is a free agent. Tashawn Gibson from San Francisco is a free agent. Xavier McKinney.
I forgot about Xavier McKinney.
I know you're talking about the draft, but like
Kyle Duggar.
Yeah, Kyle Duggar, Terrell.
There's some guys out there, who's a free agent who I really wanted, but there's no way that he is, first of all, leaving Tampa, and there's also no way we can afford him. Is Antoine Winfield?
Apparently, they're tagging him and not Mike Evans.
I'm not surprised.
Geno Stone from Baltimore.
There's some guys available. The problem is a lot of these guys are young. These are almost all of the ones that you're mentioning these are young players. Like they're not going to be cheap, unfortunately.
But Jeremy Chin could.
You think Jeremy Chin is going to be cheap? I don't think he's going to be as expensive.
I think
he'd be an option.
I think you probably get him from maybe Rich? 5. Yeah, what's up, Rich? Hope you had a good show on the Wild Wild West pod. getting a chance to talk about that AFC West and sadly those Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs.
It's certainly wild.
We're talking about the safety position.
Unfortunately.
Thanks for hopping on, Rich. We're talking about the safety position right now. Rodney McLeod is another one. But yeah, there's some legitimate options, man, as far as that safety group. So I think that like
you got to give Justin Simmons a running mate if he's going to stay on this team, which
it's possible.
You got to keep him for life, but I wouldn't blame him if he doesn't want to. You got to go chase that ring, which would just be devastating. But
you understand why.
Yeah, I understand why. I think you got to give him. You can't make his job harder than it already is. Right. You got to give him a running mate, and I wish Caden Stearns was healthy, but unfortunately, I just have to go into this offseason with the assumption that I don't know when he'll be healthy, and you have a safety position to fill.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what the Broncos do, because that safety room is pretty crazy. But I will say that I wouldn't be surprised. So given what
do you think they like PJ Locke enough to just say you're the starter?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I just think that, and actually I will say this. Given with what we just rattled off with the safety free agency class, of possibly how deep that safety free agency class is, there is a scenario because of how deep it is that PJ Locke doesn't necessarily sign with like the Philadelphia Eagles or any other team. He comes back and signs with the Broncos because of the familiarity and the way he played under Vance Joseph. And frankly, I could see it to where he signs a prove-it deal, right? If you will, like a 1 year where he's starting for a full year and he proves that he is going to be the guy to earn that starting job somewhere else, or whether it's again with Denver for like a much more money, but like because of how deep that safety room is, I could see them coming back and be like, hey, we'll sign you. Let's sign you to that 1 year deal. We'll actually make you that starter opposite of Justin. And even too, I think this is the other point that we didn't get a chance to mention with Caden Stearns. But when you talk about familiarity, I think people forget at times, like when he was at Texas and a freshman, guess who the junior or senior was at Texas? PJ Locke. So really? I think so I think that so when you look at it from just the familiarity side of things, like I wouldn't be surprised if PJ Locke comes back.
I definitely think he's coming back. My question to that is more, do they view him as the starter? Like, because obviously Kareem Jackson just pretty much, not that he was having less snaps anyway, but like, do you think they're confident enough in PJ Locke to just say, you're the starter? We obviously still have Caden Stearns in the wings, and they kind of, I'm not going to say they punt the position, but they don't focus on the position as much as maybe we're assuming.
Well, frankly, I think maybe one of the better things that they possibly could do, and this is also to a benefit of Caden Stearns, I could see them having PJ Locke be the starter opposite of Justin, but then have Stearns be possibly the player that we saw with Vic Fangio, which was, a safety who is going to be a rover, like a rover safety that is going to be
kind of like the star.
Yeah, exactly. Position. Like, so I wouldn't be upset about that, and especially given with how talented he is at Stearns. I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at a little bit of some different alternatives from the safety position in general, like how they can utilize him. So, as far as the cornerback position goes, this is going to be a fun one. Let me just phrase it this way. It actually will not cost a fair amount of money for the Broncos to sign a cornerback too, right? So, and especially given the fact the Broncos are not going to be dipping into the tier 1 of free agents and possibly maybe not necessarily the tier 2 of free agents for cornerback too, you can still sign a tier 3 free agent that can possibly even be a cornerback too. Who are those guys? Well, it's funny you ask. So now let's look at the cornerback position. So I would imagine, Adoree Jackson may not necessarily be your cornerback too, but he had 28 years old. He's currently like ranked, if you will, like number 1 on this list, and that's just because of his 2023 AAV, if you will. Then you have Stephon Gilmore, which frankly, given his age,
you got to bring Kendall Fuller back. Stephon Gilmore is interesting. I think a couple things. I don't think he's leaving Dallas.
Yeah.
I also think he just wants to win.
Yeah.
And I can't blame him. I mean, he's not young. Right. Same with Micah Hyde.
Stephon Gilmore could go to Washington to go be with Dan Quinn.
You know what's interesting on this list? And we'll get there. So you keep going. Keep going.
Well, if I mention his name, feel free to just chime in immediately. Micah Hyde, obviously, is one guy we just mentioned, but Michael Davis, Jeffrey Okudah, the former prized corner from Ohio State, Kenny Moore, former Colorado star, Chidobe Awuzie from Cincinnati. We know that one of the reasons why he's, possibly there and possibly going to be a cornerback 2 option is because of Cam Taylor-Britt emerging as, cornerback 1 for the Cincinnati Bengals. So Awuzie would certainly come in and be cornerback 2 for the Broncos, given with possibly 2 with him being 28 years old. CJ Henderson is out there, Manuel Mosley. And again, if I say his name, Brandon, feel free to chime in.
I'm pretty sure you haven't said it, but I'm also surprised because you've passed him.
Who did I miss?
It might be that because I had to plug in my headset. I was thinking specifically of Jeff Okudah.
I did say his name, yeah.
You did say Jeff Okudah? Okay, well, I missed it. I think it's because I was trying to pull up where he plays for, because I forgot that they actually sent him to the Falcons. But he was the 3rd overall pick.
Have you seen his market value, though?
Here's the thing. I kind of think I know his market value on SpotTrack is going to be really high.
Take a guess.
I don't know. It's like 15 million. I don't know if I buy that, though, because here's the reason I'm saying Jeff Okudah. I know that there was definitely the downside here is there was some injury issues that happened here, because he basically had some kind of core issue his rookie year, and then I think he tore his Achilles or something his second year. So he's had some injury problems. But the reason I bring him up is I think could be a low-key reclamation project. And I say reclamation project because I don't think he's going to command the kind of money that SpotTrack is projecting that he will, because I think there's definitely been people that have labeled him as almost a bust, and I don't think they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think a change of scenery and getting him with our unfortunately, if we still had Christian Parker, please. But even with
Jim Leonard,
I mean, I would be hard pressed to find a better coach to try to reclaim as our defensive backs coach and defensive passing coordinator to kind of reclaim Jeff Okudah than Jim Leonard. I think he kind of came back when he came back from those injuries. He kind of just he was kind of meh. He was good against the run, but he was kind of a liability in coverage. So that's why I am interested in him, and I don't think he's going to be that expensive. I don't know if he's going to be cheap because he is still really young. He's only 25, but I do think because they traded him for a 5th round pick. Like he kind of just he was a bust. Like in the sense of what you would expect the number 3 overall pick to do, and the hype coming out of Ohio State for him is like,
at least in air quotes, it's
the number 1 by far cornerback in that class, like elite corner. Yeah. I liked him. I was kind of interested in. I mean, he wasn't going to fall that far, but us taking him in that draft, I mean, he could be a guy that you could potentially get for cheaper, and you're not forcing him to be the number 1. You can get him in a room with, first of all, get him in a room with Pat Surtain, and let Pat Surtain influence him. Give him Jim Leonhard as his coach. Wouldn't hate it. Again, if he's going to be that expensive, I'm out. Like, I don't want him at that price point, but I don't think that price point is accurate because I think he's been enough of a bust where you can get him cheaper.
Well, you got to also keep in mind too that Jim Leonhard has Big Ten ties, and is at least a very strong influence with the Big Ten. And Okudah being from Ohio State, and in that Big Ten, I'd imagine Jim Leonhard knows a thing or two about Mr. Okudah. But also too, like, it would be interesting too, like with the secondary is like, what will be the overall, because like the other part that we have to factor into this is, like we were just talking about with Alex Forsyth, George Paton in that same conversation, when he was on that press conference, he went out and he mentioned, of course, Alex Forsyth by name, saying that he is a possible starter on this football team. Well, there was someone else that he mentioned in that same conversation, Riley Moss. If they feel comfortable in this idea that Riley Moss, if they feel comfortable in Riley Moss actually being a cornerback too, which, by the way, not to bring his name up once more in the last 30 seconds, Jim Leonhard is from the Big Ten. So I would at least, keep Riley Moss a little bit filed away, possibly with how he even, knows a thing or two about Mr. Riley Moss down there with the Iowa, because of course we know Iowa and Wisconsin go way back. Wisconsin go way back. So he knows all about Mr. Riley Moss. So if they feel really comfortable about, Riley Moss to cornerback too, then that's certainly going to change things, how they look at things. But that said, though, you could probably still get a guy like maybe a said reclamation project and maybe put him in and actually ask him to possibly be like a corner 3, right? Not a nickel, but a corner 3, for your football team, right? Like maybe that is a guy like a Jeff Okudah, right? And then you're talking a little bit about, possibly a little bit more secondary depth for your team. I think another one that I think would be fascinating if you're going to be talking, maybe, I don't know about a reclamation project, but in terms of just a freaky athlete, Noah Igbayanahi.
First of all, you totally butchered that name, and I was about to bring him up. Noah Igbenogany. I was close. I was surprised to actually see him as I forgot that he was going to be a free agent. He was a former first-round pick. He originally played for the Dolphins, and then they traded him to the Cowboys.
His projected value is super 3.
He's like, super low. The interesting thing about that is he wasn't fantastic in Dallas, but Mike McDaniels specifically came out and said they actually didn't want to trade him. They traded him for Kelvin Joseph, who was another cornerback, but they weren't trying to get rid of him. Apparently, the Cowboys came to them and said, like, hey, we're interested in acquiring this guy. He kind of had a bit of a learning curve, I guess, coming into the NFL. He's still only 24. He's really young. He was drafted in the first round in 2020. Like, he came into the league really young. He had a lot of learning to do, a lot of growing to do. I think he is a guy that he's like a slight sleeper, I think, a little bit. He wasn't super fantastic for the Dolphins. You didn't really see him play for the Cowboys a ton, but I was going to bring him up as well. And it's Igbenogany. And I really want to get another guy whose last name we can't pronounce because it'd be fun.
It's just to make the announcers, world a big nightmare. And
Iggy Biggy. I just can't wait for someone to call him Iggy Biggy.
Yeah, itty bitty. Yeah.
No, Iggy Biggy.
No, I know, but I
know.
Yeah. Or I mean, as we said, like make an announcer's life, the worst. Now, of course, make our life the worst. I couldn't even pronounce his name right, even though I was close. I was a little bit close.
Igbenogany. It's not.
Would you re-sign Ronald Darby again?
How much?
I mean, he wouldn't be cheap, or he wouldn't be expensive.
Give me a number.
We'll just say 5. Like 2 for 5.
2 for 5?
Meaning like
no.
Meaning like, okay, so then, and maybe it's not 5. Maybe it's like 2 for like.
I'd say 1 for 2. I'd sign him to a 1-year deal for $2 million.
It probably would be a 1-year deal, but I mean, he played pretty well with Baltimore.
He played pretty well with Baltimore. He didn't play well with us.
No, I know that, but so would you re-sign Fabian Moreau?
Just as a special teams guy? Sure. Would you bring back Isaac Yiadom?
Yiadom. Got him.
I didn't know he was a free agent.
Yeah, that's a blasphemy.
I know. How about? Oh my God, Eli Apple. No, I don't need the. I don't need the memes. No more memes.
If we're gonna talk about
Christian Fulton is a free agent.
That was the other one I was going to.
Oh, that's not I wanted us to draft him.
One of the guys that's going to end up being expensive, of course, is Jalen Johnson, and that's not happening.
Jalen Johnson's not happening. I saw him and I immediately passed him because I was like, there's no way. But I was pounding the table. I wanted him so bad. When he fell to the second round, I was like, yeah, you got to find a way.
But I mean, this is a fun group though to look at, and I'm curious, to see what they do. Because I mean, again, I think like anything, given their roster evaluations for wherever they are, going and looking at this roster, either in the center position, offensive line position, how they evaluate Garrett Bowles.
Garrett Bowles is the one thing to me that's like the domino I'm waiting for to see what happens, because that's going to determine a lot. And I guess the other thing that you could say is, how badly do we want to trade up for a quarterback, and do we trade Pat Surtain? I mean, I doubt it, but
it's like what
those are my two.
It's like what you and I said last week, because when we talked about the defensive line, because the defensive line in general ranges between the interior to the edge rushers to pass rushers, right? And even being a need there, like it's a rather big need on the interior and the exterior for that defensive line, but also even a wide receiver, like a dominant wide receiver, the wide receiver one, right? But the moment they make a decision on Garrett Bowles, and again, this is what we said last week, is like they make that decision on Garrett Bowles and say, like, let's move on. You're talking about a premier position that's gone. Like a premier position for whoever is going to be a quarterback back there, whether it's Jarrett Stidham, JJ McCarthy, whoever is going to be back there. Michael Penix, I saw Michael Penix in the chat earlier. Like Michael Penix could be back there, and Michael Penix is going to be going into a far worse situation going to the Broncos, because he had the best offensive line in college football, and he's basically going to be going to a team that wouldn't necessarily have a left tackle yet, right? That's obviously like depending on like what they would figure out, but like you're talking at that point of like the Broncos having a left tackle there to basically to basically a premier position that needs to be filled. And not just that, a premier position that needs to be filled at the expense of probably north of more than 10, if not more, million a year.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you had to like just make a blind prediction right now, what is the first move this offseason that we make? Whether it's a trade, whether it's a trade up, whether it's acquiring a player, whether it's signing a player, re-signing a player.
Move?
What do you think?
I'm gonna save that because we're still doing our free agency look as far as, like we haven't done the linebacker. I'm gonna wait till like we talk about I'm gonna wait till we talk about the linebackers, and then we'll
never mind.
And then we'll talk about like the tight end group, because I think we just have the linebacker room, right? We just have the linebacker room.
Never mind.
And the tight end room, right? Is that what we have left? I mean, not counting the quarterback, right? But and running back, right? I guess we didn't get a chance to talk about running back.
We'll get to it.
I'm just saying I will save it once all of that's done, and then we'll have that conversation about possibly like what's the first signing and position that they're going to go after and sign.
Never mind. I jumped the gun. I had an interesting thought, but I'll wait.
Well, here in the vein.
No. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to say it.
No.
I'll wait. No.
I'm not asking you to say it. I'm just saying in the vein of treating it like a teaser trailer. Why don't you do it like a teaser trailer?
It was dependent on what your answer was. On what you thought the first move was going to be, because I just had a theory. But we'll
You really wanted to say it, did you?
No, I'm trying to figure out the way to make this a teaser. I can't. We'll get there. I don't know how to tease it.
Okay. Well, guys,
short version.
Okay.
It's going to be telling. That's all I'm going to say is I think it's telling.
Well, let me just say this. Let's just go strictly offense, defense. Offense or defense. Okay.
That's all I'm going to say. That's it. That's the teaser.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for hopping on for another episode of the show. Obviously, we've been doing a little bit of a deep dive positionally and into free agents, in both the offense and defensive sides of the ball. Actually, come next week, we're gonna try and do something a little bit special next week. We'll still continue we'll still do our free agency breakdowns, like positionally, like looking at it from the the running back perspective or the linebacker perspective, the tight end position, et cetera. And then, of course, the quarterback position. And it's probably fitting we save the quarterback position for last. But we'll continue our little bit of a deep dive, but we're going to do something a little bit different. And because it's free agency right around the corner, I think it's fitting to talk to one of the guys who I feel very, very comfortable enough to talk about free agency and just specifically the salary cap. And I know we spent a really good synopsis on the 5280 podcast talking about the breakdown of the moves that the Broncos can possibly make or maybe likely make for this team to be, under the salary cap and make, the necessary moves in free agency. We're actually going to do something a little bit different in terms of a special episode. We're going to have my buddy Steven Kriz, who has been a writer with us over at Proudly Orange. He's going to hop on with us, or at least try and hop on with us for a Monday episode of the show. Same time, possibly like a 7:30 time slot. And so we're going to have him hop on, and it's just going to be necessarily a salary cap episode where you guys who are in the comments, if you guys have any salary cap questions for him, we're just going to take a deep dive into that salary cap and understand maybe the myths and, everything that kind of goes on with it. And just get a chance to understand, the salary cap, the NFL salary cap in particular. I should say the Broncos salary cap as a whole, and possibly like what they could do with that salary cap. And then maybe if we have time, we'll talk about the positional groups and stuff like that, and continue our, the thing that we've been doing, which is basically, taking the deep dives in that free agency class. So again, thank you guys so much for hopping on in a brand new episode of the Manely Broncos podcast. And again, until next time, we will see you on another episode of the Manely Broncos podcast.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle. Wait a minute,